The year was 1867, and Arizona lay dry as old bones under the sun. Wind cut across the open desert plain, rattling dead brush and whistling through the cracks of a sagging ranch house that once dreamed of prosperity. Inside, a lone man sat at a table scarred with years of use. Elias Hart, 40, lean as a fence post, stared at the bottom of a tin bowl. The thin broth inside carried the faintest trace of beans, stretched with nothing but boiled water and salt scraped from the bottom of a sack. He swirled it with a wooden spoon, listening to the hollow scrape against metal, then lifted it to his lips. The taste was nothing, not even flavor enough to stir a memory. He swallowed, forcing it down, though hunger gnawed harder with every mouthful. His beard had grown ragged, peppered with gray. His shirt hung loose, collarbones sharp as antlers beneath the fabric. The ranch had bled him near dry. Through the cracked window, Elias watched the yard. Once cattle grazed there, dozens strong, their hides shining in the sun. Now nothing moved but dust and a single crow circling above the old barn. The corral stood empty, the fences leaning like tired men. His herd had died slow, drought, disease, coyotes, one by one until the land was bare and his dreams turned to ghosts. He pushed the bowl aside and pressed his palms to his face. He had nothing left but this land, a patch of dirt clinging stubborn to his name. His wife had been buried out back 5 years now, beneath a mesquite tree. Consumption took her in the spring when the wildflowers bloomed cruelly bright. Since then, Elias had carried on like a shadow of the man he once was, tending the ranch with hope shrinking by the day. A sound broke through the silence, the squeal of the front gate. Elias froze, hand drifting to the rifle propped against the wall. Few visited these parts, and none without reason. He rose, slow and deliberate, and stepped to the door. The light outside stabbed his eyes. On the dirt road leading up to the ranch stood 3 figures. Small, thin, their dark hair tangled by wind. Children. Apache children. Elias's hand tightened on the doorframe. His heart kicked hard. He knew the risks of any dealings with the Apache. A man, alone, unguarded, could vanish without a word, and no sheriff west of the Pecos would lift a finger. Yet these were not warriors. These were hungry, hollow-eyed children, no older than 10. The eldest, a boy, stepped forward. His clothes hung in tatters, bare feet caked with dust. He said nothing, just watched Elias with wary eyes that had seen too much. The 2 younger girls clung to each other's hands, staring at the ranch house as though it were a castle. Elias's throat went dry. He thought of his bowl of broth, thought of the scraps left in the pot. He barely had enough to keep himself standing another day. His hand twitched toward the rifle again, not from hate, but from fear. Then, unbidden, he heard his wife's voice in memory. Her words came soft from a time when she still rocked by the fire, sewing with tired fingers. Kindness, Eli, she had said, even when the world's gone hard. Don't let it take that from you. The memory struck him harder than the hunger. Elias cursed under his breath, shoved the door wide, and stepped onto the porch. What do you want? He asked, voice rough from disuse. The boy did not answer in English. His words tumbled quick in his own tongue, sharp yet musical. Elias caught none of it, but hunger needed no translation. The boy touched his stomach, then gestured toward the pot simmering faintly on the stove inside. Elias let out a long, heavy sigh. His bones ached with the weight of the choice. One meal meant nothing and everything. You're fools, he muttered, though whether to them or himself he didn't know. He turned back inside, ladled what little remained of the broth into 3 cracked bowls, and carried them out. The children took them without a word, crouching right there in the dirt to drink. The slurping sounds filled the silence of the yard, pitiful and grateful, all at once. Elias leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. He watched their ribs rise beneath skin too tight, watched them scrape every last drop from the bowls with their fingers. He felt shame burn in him, not at giving, but at how little he had to give. When the bowls were clean, the boy stood and nodded once. His dark eyes held something Elias could not name. Respect, maybe, or warning. Then the children moved toward the barn, slipping inside without asking. Elias opened his mouth to protest, then shut it. Let them sleep there. Wolves might prowl, and the desert night cut colder than bone. He left them be. Back inside, the ranch house felt emptier than ever. Elias sat again at the table, staring at the pot, now scraped clean. His own stomach growled, a hollow ache that seemed to echo the silence. He leaned back, staring at the rafters. You'd have fed them too, he whispered toward the shadows where he liked to think his wife lingered. That night, sleep came uneasy. Elias lay on his cot, the old rifle across his chest. Dreams twisted in his head. Apache warriors creeping through the dark, fire spreading across the barn, arrows whistling from the hills. He saw his ranch in flames, his body sprawled in the dirt. Each time, he jolted awake, listening to the stillness. The children's soft breaths drifted faintly from the barn. No war cries, no hoofbeats, only the endless sigh of desert wind. By the gray edge of dawn, Elias gave up on sleep. He rose, splashed water on his face from the basin, and stepped outside. The air carried the chill of night, not yet broken by sun. His boots crunched the dirt as he walked toward the barn. He pushed the door open a crack. Inside, the children lay curled in straw, tangled together like pups. For a fleeting moment, something warm flickered in Elias's chest. Then he shut the door quietly and turned back. That was when he saw it. On the horizon, a line of dust rose like smoke. The faint thundering of hooves carried across the flat. Elias narrowed his eyes against the glare of early sun. Riders, many of them. He stood frozen, breath caught. As they drew nearer, the shapes sharpened. Apache warriors, 50 strong, mounted and armed. Spears glinted, rifles slung across their backs. Faces painted, eyes hard as stone. They rode in silence, spreading wide as they neared the ranch, surrounding it like a tightening noose. The ground shook beneath the weight of their horses. Elias's hand went instinctively to the rifle slung at his shoulder. He backed toward the porch, heart pounding. Sweat broke across his brow, though the air was still cool. 1 man against 50, a spark against a storm. His finger brushed the trigger, though he knew well enough what a single shot would mean. The riders reined in, hooves stomping the dirt. They sat like statues, every eye fixed on him. The silence pressed heavy, thick as smoke. Elias's throat worked. He lifted the rifle, barrel wavering toward the nearest warrior. He had nothing left to lose but his life, and even that felt borrowed. Then a cry pierced the air. The barn door swung open, and the 3 children came spilling out, barefoot, running toward the riders. They shouted in their language, voices high, hands waving. The warriors stirred at last, murmurs rolling through them like wind through tall grass. The boy pointed back at Elias, words tumbling, quick, urgent. The girls clung to his arms, nodding fiercely. Elias stood frozen, rifle half-raised, eyes darting between the children and the wall of warriors. His mouth went dry. Every second stretched, brittle as glass. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. What came next would decide whether he lived or died. ChatGPT said. The circle of horses held steady, 50 warriors astride them, their faces marked with paint that caught the early light. The dust of their rides still swirled about them like smoke, the thunder of hooves fading into a tense silence. Elias' heart stood rooted to his porch, his rifle heavy in his hands, though his arms trembled for more than its weight. He knew the balance of his life had tipped, and the next breath might be his last. The boy who had eaten his broth the night before clung to the leg of the largest rider. His words tumbled fast, fierce, spilling upward to the mounted warrior. The girls echoed him, their small hands gesturing back toward Elias. The circle of Apaches did not break. Their dark eyes cut into Elias like arrows, measuring him, weighing what sort of man he was. At last, the rider at the boy's side moved forward. He was broad in the shoulders, with black hair braided and tied with strips of leather, a scar cut across his cheek that seemed older than some of the younger warriors themselves. His horse moved with the calm authority of a seasoned mount. The others shifted as he approached, giving him space. Elias's gut told him this man was chief. The horse stopped only a few paces from the porch. The chief dismounted in one fluid motion, standing tall, his height nearly equal to Elias even with boots raising him. His gaze was steady, impenetrable, and his silence pressed harder than any shout. Elias swallowed, rifle sagging slightly. His voice cracked in his throat, but he forced words out. They came hungry. His tongue faltered. His words felt pitiful in the air, useless against the weight of 50 silent witnesses. The chief raised a hand, and the camp quieted further. He spoke in Apache first, his voice deep and deliberate, then switched to broken English, shaped like stone grinding on stone. Why, you feed them. The question struck like a hammer. Not an accusation. Not yet, only a measure. Elias forced himself to meet the man's gaze. His own voice, when it came, sounded hollow in his ears. Because they were starving. And I know hunger. The chief's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in thought. Around him, murmurs flickered among the riders. Some frowned, some smirked, others studied Elias with unreadable expressions. The boy clutched tighter at the chief's leg, whispering, his voice too low for Elias to catch. The chief let the silence stretch, then gave a sharp nod. You, come. He turned, mounted again, and motioned for Elias to follow. Elias's gut clenched. His rifle felt suddenly like a child's toy in his hands, foolish and small. He set it down on the porch rail, drew a long breath, and stepped toward his horse tethered at the post. The act of mounting felt like walking into his own hanging. The circle opened as he rode into it, then closed again behind him. Warriors flanked him, rifles slung, bows strung, their horses breathing hard. The children rode among them, faces bright with a relief Elias couldn't share. They rode east away from his dying ranch, into the desert where the sun already climbed merciless. The land swallowed sound, save for the rhythmic thunder of hooves and the hiss of grit beneath them. Elias rode stiff, every nerve alight, certain at any moment he would feel a bullet in his back or a blade at his throat. The trail wound into hills through scrub and rock. The riders moved swift and sure, as though the land itself had carved paths for them alone. Hours bled together, the sun baking down, sweat crawling along Elias's neck. His mouth dried, his stomach hollowed, his mind clawing at the thought, why hadn't they killed him already? At last, the riders crested a ridge, and below stretched a valley hidden from the world. Smoke curled from fires, hides stretched on poles, horses grazing near a stream. Women worked, children ran, elders sat in circles. It was an Apache camp, alive and guarded. As they descended, faces turned toward Elias. Eyes followed him with suspicion, with scorn, with wary curiosity. He felt like a wolf driven into a fold of sheep, except here the sheep carried knives. The riders dismounted at the heart of camp, near a great fire pit. Elias was pulled from his horse, not roughly, but with a grip that told him escape was not an option. The chief stood tall beside him, calling words to the gathered crowd. His voice rolled like thunder across the valley, commanding attention. Elias's chest tightened as more warriors surrounded, a half-circle of steel and fire. An elder with hair white as river foam stepped forward, his gaze sharp despite his years. He pointed at Elias, words fierce and cutting. Others joined, their voices rising, anger sparking. Though Elias couldn't understand the tongue, he knew their meaning. White settlers had brought blood. White settlers had brought broken treaties, stolen land, massacred families. Elias felt the weight of all that history pressing onto his shoulders, though he had carried none of it himself. He could almost hear his fate being decided with every heated word. Then the boy spoke. He pushed forward, his small voice cracking in the air, yet steady. He gestured with his hands, pantomiming the empty bowl, the spoon, Elias giving him food. The girls spoke too, their little hands clasped together, their words rising high. The crowd stirred. Some faces softened, some hardened further. Voices clashed like steel. Finally, the chief raised his hand, and silence fell. He stepped toward Elias, eyes burning. "One man," he said slowly, shaping the English with weight. "One man give food when he has none. That man," he struck his chest with his fist, "we honor." Elias's knees nearly buckled from the force of relief. It was not forgiveness, not friendship, but it was not death. He dared a breath. But the tension did not vanish. Some warriors spat into the dirt, glaring daggers at him. The elder shook his head, muttering with venom. Elias knew one kindness would not undo years of blood. He remained an intruder, tolerated only by the chief's word. That night, they gave him a place by the fire under guard. A woman brought him water in a gourd. He drank greedily, the coolness cutting through his parched throat. Hunger still gnawed him, but thirst eased first. As firelight flickered, shadows of dancers played against hides stretched wide. Drums thudded slow, steady, echoing in his bones. Elias sat silent, staring into the flames, his mind a storm. Why had the chief spared him? What lay waiting at dawn? He thought again of his wife, of her words. Kindness, Eli, even when the world's gone hard. He wondered if she had sent those children to his door, or if the desert had simply played a crueler hand. The chief approached him then, sitting across the fire. He studied Elias without speaking for a long while, the firelight catching the scar on his cheek. At last, in halting English, he said, "You know hunger. You know loss. Yes?" Elias's throat tightened. He nodded. "I, both." The chief's eyes flickered, softer than before. "Then you know life here." He gestured wide to the desert beyond. "This land, it takes much, it gives little." Elias held his gaze. In that moment, he saw not an enemy, not a stranger, but a man carrying burdens like his own. Different faces, same weight. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, until the chief rose and left. Elias lay awake long after, the stars burning sharp above, the drums echoing in his chest. He did not know what the next day would bring, but he knew his life had already shifted, pulled onto a path he had not chosen, yet could not turn from. When dawn spilled across the valley, he would face judgment again, and whatever came of it would decide, not just his fate, but the future of everything he still dared to call his own. ChatGPT said, "The first light of dawn crept into the Apache Valley, painting the hides and brush shelters in hues of pale gold. Smoke from last night's fire still curled lazily, clinging to the cool air before the sun burned it away." Elias' heart rose stiffly from the ground where he'd slept under the watch of two young warriors who had never let their eyes leave him. His back ached, his mouth dry, his stomach gnawed hollow. But more than hunger, it was uncertainty that twisted his gut. He did not know if this morning would bring him mercy or death. The camp stirred with life. Women carried water from the stream. Children chased each other barefoot in the dust. Old men sat together murmuring like weathered stones rubbing against one another. Elias felt every gaze cut toward him as he stood. Some eyes carried suspicion sharp as blades, others contempt, a few only cold indifference. Then the chief appeared, Nantan Loma, broad-shouldered, scarred, with a gravity in his step that made the camp part around him like water before a stone. His expression was unreadable as he approached Elias. For a long moment, they only looked at one another, the silence more suffocating than any words. "You ride," the chief said at last, his English halting but clear. Elias frowned. "Ride where?" The chief gestured for him to follow. Warriors mounted their horses, the children among them. The whole column moved east away from camp into the teeth of the desert. Elias climbed onto his mare, his body heavy with dread. The ride stretched long and wordless. Sun blazed overhead, the land a cruel furnace of rock and sand. Yet the warriors moved with ease, as though the earth itself welcomed them. Elias felt the heat sap his strength. Sweat stung his eyes, grit filled his teeth. But he kept pace because he had no choice. At last they entered a valley carved between red cliffs. The air cooled, the sound of trickling water echoed faintly. Elias blinked against the glare, and then his breath caught. Below, grazing in a wide sweep of meadow, were cattle, dozens of them, 50 head at least, their hides strong and sleek, their horns long and curved. His chest tightened at the sight. A herd such as that could breathe life back into his dead ranch, turn dust into hope again. The chief dismounted, gesturing at the herd. "These," he said, his voice steady. "Yours." Elias nearly stumbled from his horse. "Mine." Nantan Loma nodded once. "You feed our children with nothing. Now we feed your land with plenty." Elias stared, heart thundering. His throat worked, words tangled inside him. The gift was unthinkable. It was life where death had settled. His vision blurred, tears stinging unbidden. He pressed a hand to his face, choking on the rush of it all. The hunger, the loneliness, the memory of his wife, the weight of despair he had carried for years. Now all at once he felt it crack, replaced by something sharp and bright. He bowed his head, voice rough. I don't know how to thank you." The chief studied him, his scar stark in the morning light. "Do not thank. Do honor. Live true." They drove the cattle back with him, riders flanking, dust rising in clouds behind. Hours passed before his ranch came into sight again, the lonely house and sagging barn waiting like tired old friends. Elias's heart swelled as the herd flowed into the empty corral, their bellows echoing across the land. His ranch, once silent, now thundered with life. Neighbors came for miles to see. Farmers, ranchers, drifters, all drawn by the sight of a man who had nothing, now surrounded by plenty. Elias felt their stares cut into him, questions burning behind their eyes. Some whispered of miracles, others of devil's bargains. None could understand how he, the broken rancher, now commanded such wealth. For a brief moment, Elias felt pride bloom in him. He walked among the cattle, their hides brushing his hands, their smell filling his lungs. He thought of the winter ahead, of fences mended, of calves born in spring. For the first time in years, the future seemed more than just another sunrise to survive. But whispers travel faster than wind on the frontier. Within days, the wrong ears heard. Men greedy for cattle, for land, for easy gain. Outlaws who lived by the gun. Ranchers who saw Elias's sudden fortune as an insult to their own struggles. They gathered in the dark corners of saloons, voices low, eyes burning. One night, as Elias stood by the corral, watching the herd settle under the stars, he felt the prickle of eyes on his back. He turned, rifle instinctively in hand. A figure shifted in the darkness, then another. Shadows detached from the night. Half a dozen men armed, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. Even in heart, one drawled. The voice slithered with malice. "Fine herd you got there. Shame for a man like you to try keeping it all to yourself." Elias raised the rifle, steady though his blood ran cold. "You'll not take a hoof from me." The men laughed, cruel and sharp. Guns lifted, moonlight glinting on steel. The first shot cracked, echoing across the land. Elias dove for cover behind the corral fence. Splinters flew as bullets tore wood. He fired back, the recoil kicking his shoulder, muzzle flash lighting the night. Horses screamed. Cattle bawled in panic, dust churned under hooves. The fight was chaos, shouts, curses, the crack of rifles, the acrid stench of gunpowder choking the air. Elias fought like a cornered wolf, every shot fueled by desperation. But he was only one man, and the shadows pressed closer, relentless. Then came a sound that froze the night, the fierce cry of warriors riding from a ridge. Elias risked a glance. Against the moon, riders surged down, their horses fast as thunder. Arrows whistled, rifles roared. The Apaches had returned. The outlaws cursed, their courage faltering as the attack swept into them. Men fell, screaming, arrows buried deep. Gunfire rattled, then scattered, the enemy fleeing into the dark like rats chased by flame. The land fell to silence, broken only by the moan of wind and the lowing of cattle. Elias stood, chest heaving, rifle smoke curling from the barrel. His eyes searched the ridges. There, silhouetted against the stars, stood Nantan Loma, straight and unbending. The chief raised his hand in salute. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked across the distance. Two men bound not by blood, but by a choice made in hunger and answered in honor. Then the riders wheeled, vanishing into the night, as swift as they had come. Elias lowered his rifle, knees weak. The corral was safe, the herd still his, the outlaws driven off. But more than cattle, more than survival, he carried now a gift deeper than flesh or land. He carried a bond forged in kindness, tested in fire, sealed in blood. Later, as he sat by the fire outside his house, the herd settled in the corral. He felt the weight of it all. His wife's voice seemed to echo from the flames. Kindness, Eli, even when the world's gone hard. He looked into the fire, the night vast around him, the stars sharp as blades above. And he spoke softly to himself, to her, to anyone listening. One meal. That's all it took. One meal to change the whole of it. The flame snapped, sparks rising into the dark. He thought of the chief's words. Do not thank. Do honor. Live true. And Elias knew, deep as bone, that he would. The frontier was a land that tested every soul who dared claim it. It took, it punished, it stripped men bare. But sometimes when the choice was hardest, when hunger or fear whispered to turn away, one act of mercy could change everything. The story of Elias' heart would spread, told in saloons, at campfires, whispered along trails where men weighed greed against decency. Some would laugh, some would scoff, but others would remember that once a hungry rancher shared his last meal, and an Apache chief changed his life forever. And so the fire burned and the cattle lowed, and the night closed around him like a great, silent witness.